Hi everyone, welcome back to Blurred Box. I'm Chloe.
I'm Haven.
I'm Pooja.
And I'm Sophie.
And this is our podcast. We're 4 online students in 4 different places around the world from Stanford University's online high school come together every week to discuss a variety of topics ranging from world events to our lives in an online school and invite guests to take part in our discussions and share their views. This week we have another special guest. He is another fellow student of ours at OHS and also our senior class president, Tomas Belmar.
Hey, thanks for having me, Chloe,
Yeah,
and
thank you for
everyone else
coming.
Yeah,
on
it's a
here.
pleasure to have you.
How's everyone doing?
So I guess go ahead and introduce yourself and just share a bit of who you are.
Okay. So as Chloe said, my name is Tomas Belmar. I've been in the OHS since 9th grade, I believe. I started out as a single course student, ended up as a full-time student. And yeah, that's the small rundown about what my life is, generally speaking. And I end up having a pretty similar life to other OHSers. You know, we spend a lot of time at home, but we still get to balance out our friends' life and social life outside of that.
So as you're from
Yeah.
Portugal, I'm actually curious as to how you joined OHS, or like what drew you to the school in the first place.
That's actually a pretty funny story. I was a little 9th grader with an obsession that I wanted to go to Stanford. So I was browsing the Stanford website in 9th grade, and that pop-up just came up. It wasn't even one of those advertisements that people now get in. I mean, I've seen people get them on Instagram even for the OHS. But yeah, this one was straight up in the Stanford website. I saw it advertised and I checked it out, and I asked my mom if I could do a course there. I was studying computer science at the time, so I wanted to do AP computer science, and my mom, she allowed me, of course, and that's how I got started.
That's great.
But yeah, I eventually became a full staff.
That's really nice.
Yeah, but I started off. I went to the summer at Stanford, the event or the meetup before I actually joined the school. So I got to meet a lot of the community then, which I think was super beneficial at my integration into the OHS community. And honestly, by the end of that, even without having started my first year at Stanford, I had already asked my mom if I could join the school full time.
Yeah,
That's so good.
Yeah. I guess that's also another pointer for those of you who are listening. And if you're planning to join OHS, or if you're already in OHS, right? Summer at Stanford, a lot of these events are a great way for you to make your friends and see them in person.
As an online student, we sacrifice so much when it comes to like meeting people in person. But, you know, just the OHS community itself is such a wholesome place, and you make so many new friends, and it really makes those in-person meetings worthwhile.
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So how's it been like actually, Tomas, in OHS for you? So far, would you be able to say kind of some of the main differences you felt? Because as we know, also for you, you've been going to an brick-and-mortar school for the longest time as well in Lisbon. So what is the biggest differences for you going from that to an online school, or even doing those two at the same time?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think my OHS experience ends up being somewhat different to other people's, since I'd say, I mean, I don't know what the percentage is, but a lot of the OHS is Americans and people who live in the States. So, of course, meetups are everywhere for them, right? If you live in Colorado, you go to a Colorado meetup. Whereas if I'm in Portugal, I think either I rely on us organizing our own meetup, or I have to go to somewhere like England to one of the bigger meetups. But generally, I think I've found a pretty good balance with keeping all my OHS friends, which is by going to, for example, summer at Stanford. That's one that I've never missed. Or actually, I did miss 1 year, but that's different. I never missed MIT Splash, which is another one of the meetups. And then really, it's just making sure that we stay in contact when I'm at home and through social media, Skype, whatever it is, playing online video games. Really, I think it's just communication's important. And that's something that you really see now with the coronavirus outbreak, since everyone's stuck at home. But friendships aren't being lost, right? If anything, in many ways, they're being strengthened.
No, I agree with that.
People are now at home, all doing.
I completely agree with that.
And people are starting to realize what this is like. I mean, suddenly, the whole world is kind of doing what we've all been
Yeah, I
doing for
almost
the
feel
past few
territorial.
years, which is.
And I joined like last year.
It's like, oh,
I've
now
made
you
so
know.
many jokes about that.
Now you know how it works. But I feel like people are getting like a pretty skewed version of online school because like Stanford Online High School is so set up and it's so
Of course.
structured. And now as brick and mortar schools are transitioning into online, they're not really understanding the full experience that online schooling can bring.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I guess that's a
It's interesting.
downside.
I've
Yeah,
seen
they-
a lot
they
of
all
my
have it.
friends from like brick and mortar schools and everything, I think, realize how much effort it takes to maintain friendships, kind of in the way, Tomas, like you were speaking about, just through really
Yeah.
putting time and effort in
Mhm.
and talking to each other and staying connected to through social media, and that it's actually, you know, kind of exhausting at points, and definitely worth
Mhm.
it. Definitely worth it
I-
for so many people. But it's interesting watching, like, you know, those people who are surrounded by, you know, hundreds of kids every single day aren't really used to putting the effort in that way. So it's interesting seeing that the table kind of turns.
Yeah, when you go to an
Yeah.
actual brick and mortar school, it's a lot easier since no matter what, you are seeing all of your classmates
Right.
every
yeah.
day.
You don't have
Yeah.
to try.
You're always
Yeah,
surrounded by people.
Yeah.
I've never really thought about that, but it is true that in the OHS, you do have to make an active effort to maintain your friends. Whereas,
Right.
it's an effort from both sides, of course.
yeah.
I think it's probably
But yeah, whereas in a brick and mortar school,
it's
you'll just
probably
see
a
them.
beneficial thing, at least in my mind, because like at public school, one of the things that I always really didn't like about it was you're kind of stuck with who you're stuck with, and your friends out of
Yeah, that's
circumstance
true.
most of the time, or friends is a very loosely used term, you know, like you just know everyone. But when you all live in different states or obviously like different countries or continents, you only make an effort to talk to people that you actually really want to be around, or people who actually
Yeah.
are like really
And I
genuine
think-
friends. So I think it's also making
Yeah,
people,
and I think because of that, and especially since we live so far apart, we're better at keeping connections after school ends and after we graduate. So I think that could really be beneficial
Yeah.
because we're putting all
Yeah.
that effort.
But at the same time, but there are pros and cons, and I do gotta say, like, if I didn't have my friend group, my physical friend group here from Portugal, I'd
Yeah,
probably go
agreed.
insane
Mm.
because at some point you do need a certain level of physical contact. And I mean, as Chloe mentioned, I've been going to my school in Lisbon since I was 3 years old, and I only left 2 years ago to come to the OHS. So I was already pretty rooted into that community, so it wasn't hard at all for me to maintain those friendships. And they're still who I hang out with the most. And I think that without them, I would have gone insane, just staying at home the whole time without any social interactions. So I think being an OHS, especially if you're an international student, it's still important to have your own group of
Right.
friends
Yeah.
No, yeah,
outside
I
of the
agree.
OHS.
Yeah. And I guess
But
like,
at the same time, I can't imagine my life without my OHS friends at this point.
definitely.
Yeah.
And just the community
Yeah.
in general.
Yeah, and being immersed, you know, in this community of, and as you said, right, mainly the American student body. Can you tell us about some of the differences, like cultural differences? I think is a big thing because being personally from my end, I've spent a very great deal of my life in Europe, and I have a base in France, so not Portugal, but in France. I've been to Portugal before actually, so from France and from Australia and Hong Kong, these places all international. It's a very huge difference for me coming into I guess in the beginning, the American student body and the American kind of like system, and also just going to America in general was a very big difference for me. Can you tell us about some of those that you've encountered between Portugal and as a whole in comparison to OHS and or the US?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think, well, I was really surprised when I was first really integrated into the OHS community to see how similar everyone was. Because I mean, in the end, we're all humans with the same emotions, same behaviors to a certain degree. And yeah, but there are those big cultural differences. I think I've noticed it mostly in a political sense.
Oh, yeah?
In what Americans think will work for their government, versus what Europeans would think will work for their government. So like, well, I'd say that Europeans are more conservative in a lot of senses, but
Yeah,
at the
I think
same
I'd agree.
time,
I agree with that too.
but more conservative in a social level, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Whereas they're more progressive when it comes to things like
Right.
healthcare,
Education.
and different
Yeah.
social benefits. Yeah, and the government taking an actual active role in its people's lives. And so I think that's the biggest difference really I noted. I think left in the US versus right in the US is very different from left in Europe versus right in Europe. Like I'd probably be more towards the left in the US spectrum, whereas I'd be more towards the right in the European spectrum. And yeah, I think that's where I really noticed the biggest differences. Other than that, well, I feel like sometimes it feels like the Europe as a continent is more united than
Maybe
the
so.
US as a country.
Oh,
Yeah.
I always see
Yeah.
I always see these. I don't know. Everything seems so binary in discussions. It's like if someone that I support says something, I have to support. Someone called me, but
Don't
where
worry
was
about
I?
it.
Where did I cut off? Sorry.
Kind of like the binary
Okay.
views.
Yeah,
of,
but I think you guys get the point.
being an
It's
American
that
discussion.
it's either something or it's the opposite of that thing. There's no in between, which is something that I mean.
Yeah.
I think everything's a spectrum. Every opinion you can have can be skewed towards a side or another without being without implying anything else really, and without implying
Moderates
who
in
you are
America
as a
Right.
person.
are hard to find.
yeah, it's not white and black. That's a common analogy people
Yeah.
make.
And I think it's that way with a
No,
lot.
yeah. I think from my end, it's just when I don't know. I think when I was in France, for example, it was a very like you said, Tomas, conservatism is a very good word to use because for living there for us, it was very kind of you keep to your own business and you kind of like you stay to your own kind of what you're doing and you're respectful of it, but it's like you're not going to be that that I don't know willing to go and be into other people's kind of way in that sense, if you know what I mean. Like so one of the biggest things for me coming into OHS was how vocal everyone was about their and I think that's also maybe just something in not to generalize for everything, but kind of growing up in the Asian side of the system of like even though it was an international school, I spent 6 years in an international school in Hong Kong, and I feel like coming to OHS is kind of it's a very different sense in where students are very vocal. I think that's that part of the student body is just that's come very naturally
In our
as
history
well.
class,
I think that's
we
one thing.
we had a great discussion about what American culture is and what defines that, because it's really hard to actually try to define that even as an American, because we really have like, you know, so many different things, different
It's
values
so
and everything.
diverse. Yeah.
But one of the ways that we tried to understand that is by looking at the short video series, and it was about what Europeans think about Americans. And there was a short skit, and it was more like it was more along
Nothing
the
good
lines
can
of
have
like
come
how
out of that.
Europeans can tell like that you're American when you walk into the room. And all of them, they were.
I feel like that's just like a
right, it was like a
roast
diss
or
track,
something.
but in reality. But you know, the top 5 were basically just along the lines of like they're loud, they're confident, they're too confident, they're too loud, and they smile. And it was interesting to see
That's
that,
funny,
you know, because that's all that I know. Kind of like I haven't ever been to Europe. Wait, no, that's a lie. I have, but I haven't like been immersed in European culture, so I'm not like familiar with exactly how like what the differences would be like. But I could definitely imagine it being like just Americans maybe more gregarious or vocal about those opinions.
Yes, but not necessarily in a bad way. I like what
Yeah.
Chloe said about how when she was in France, I like how she put it in that everyone just kind of keeps to their own business in a way, which I don't necessarily regard as a good thing at all, because when you go to a U.S. neighborhood, well, it has that neighborhood community feeling, right?
Yeah, it does.
I
That's
remember
one of the biggest
when I was
differences.
little,
I
I
totally
would watch
agree.
TV shows, and it's something like someone moves into a new house and neighbors bake them a pie or have a barbecue and invite all the neighbors. And that's just not a thing that you witness here.
That does
it's not a thing that I see in Portugal, that I haven't seen in other countries around Europe, and I assume it's just generally not the case in most places in Europe. And I think that's a great quality for the U.S. culture to have, really, in that. Whereas the whole country itself, as a whole, isn't united, in a way. I'd say that small districts are there. There's more of a family feel to it. You guys
like
are
community.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Like cultural communities, like with Chinatown, and even in Chicago. I would go to Chicago a lot for my skating practice. and I would pass through like a Polish town, and you know that they're really connected, but outside of that, nobody's really connected to the Polish community as much.
Oh,
So I think that's an interesting part about what Tomas said about the United States being united in the individual communities, but not necessarily as a whole, like culturally.
No, yeah, I can agree with that. I've definitely have more of a cultural bond with like my culture. And I think it also stems from like historical aspects, like when people started immigrating into New York City, they were searching out their race, their culture, their ethnicity to like group together, and they will help each other grow. But they were kind of secluded in that area. They would just like little pockets of diversity.
That we even do have this kind of overarching American culture that's different from Europe, in that I would almost call it entitlement. Because one overarching thing that we all do have a claim to is like the Constitution, right? Or our, right to free speech and everything. And our right, for some people, it's like the right to bear arms or anything, that they hold really, really close to their heart as like an American value of theirs. And I think that does give us a sense of entitlement in a lot of places, like you'll see, for instance, like American exchange students, if they're going, studying abroad during college or something, and they're talking about whatever they want, in other countries that don't appreciate free speech as much as us, they get a slap on the wrist for it, or they go to prison for it, or anything else. So it's interesting that I think there are a lot of things that we start to take for granted here. And I think that's a pretty widely American thing. Not very people.
That's true.
I can see that.
Like we have a lot of freedoms that we take for granted here that we might not have in other countries that we go to.
No, yeah, like I assume everywhere is going to be the same.
And I'm not saying that with
America, but that's not the case.
I'm not trying to say that, but
I think in
No.
some ways it is still in other places. I mean, like more at least developed countries. Of course, it's different if you go to a third world country, for example, or just places like China where the government has full authority of everything really. But I think generally in most countries, I wouldn't say that there's any less free speech than in the U.S. In the way that you'd go to jail. I mean, I think you'd really only go to jail if you did the same things as in the U.S., like shouting fire at a theater when there's no fire.
Yeah.
And there's just those common examples of what of free speech doesn't mean you can say whatever you want.
Right. Or it means protection from the government, right? Not protection from anyone else. Interesting.
Yeah. I think like another one of those cultural differences, I guess, going back to how you definitely were integrated into the brick and mortar system since 3 years old. What are some of the biggest, I guess, going away from the more cultural differences you can kind of feel? What do you think are some that you felt through the education system? Because I think I've read, so it's quite different and it's quite interesting actually, to be very specific to Portugal in itself, that you guys integrate human rights education very early into education. I think that's what I'm not sure whether that's the case for your school, but that's something I've read for in general for Portugal. Is that true? And I guess can I elaborate on those differences if you've felt any of those?
Well, I unfortunately don't have as much insight as I think you're hoping for, since my brick and mortar school did follow the American system, which is how I ended up being, somewhat Americanized in a way, growing up, even though I'm fully Portuguese. But I do know to a certain degree how Portuguese schools work. There's something that I don't like about them, which is that I believe in 6th or 7th grade, right away, you have to choose between 3 areas, which is either sciences, literature, and humanities, and a third one, which I forget. But that's essentially what you have to stick to after that, and then you have different amounts of credits that you have to get for each of those sections. I mean, this is all over Portugal, and then there's national final exams for everyone. And I think there's a lot of differences. It kind of binds you to a certain career path really early on.
Kind of sad.
Which.
Oh, sorry. You can continue. Okay, I was just like,
Yeah,
how?
you can
I'm
get.
just like trying to think back. It's like,
I mean,
how could I decide what I want to do at such a young age? Because I only figured out relatively what I wanted to do in high school, and I'm still figuring it out as I go. And I'm like, I feel like in America, I'm like trying to like figure out what to do in high school, and I think that's too early. But like to figure it out at sixth
Yeah.
grade,
People flip
oh
too. One of my best friends went to school for engineering and now he's an art major, you know, so you're interchange and that's for the
Yeah.
best. But maybe it's a good thing because it's also, I mean, I know the vocational training could also be really good for students in terms of, you know, future employment. If we believe that should be like what our education is geared towards. I know that in itself is a controversial statement. But, you know, if you're training them to be really professional in a field, then probably like anything, you know, starting piano young or something like that, you're going to have a better shot at it. But I agree that I did not know. I still don't really, and I'm going to college. I'm at age.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess.
something that I do dislike about the U.S. system is the fact that you have to get that one U.S. history credit, and I guess that's more personal because as a Portuguese guy following the American system, I
It's
do
okay.
not want
American
to be
students
taking that
Yeah.
don't
US
want to be
credit.
taking the
Definitely
U.S.
same
history
there on my
credit.
side.
yeah. We don't want to
That's
be
true.
taking U.S. history either.
But I do think that it would make sense if they replaced or if they made it a history credit at least. But I don't think, or I think I don't know. My thoughts are so conflicted on that. I just don't think it's necessarily essential for all Americans even to have a depthful course about the U.S. history to that degree. And I think if they made it just history in general with the option of being U.S. history, that could be beneficial, even for what you were, for that kind of sense. Well, going back to the cultural conversation, I feel like Americans feel united in the way that in that they stay in their own country, and that most of their life experience ends up being resumed to things happening in their own country. Even going on vacations is going to the other side of the country. Of course, with a lot of exceptions.
Right.
I'm not saying that Americans don't travel, but most of the cultural experiences end up being shaped by other Americans. And I think, yeah, and I think that it would be beneficial to at least give children the option once they're in high school to start learning about other things, and not exactly force them to only have that credit and then give them the option to study whatever else they want. But
even an alternative that might be more helpful than like, you know, the U.S. history or something is even taking, if it still needs to be U.S. oriented, like U.S. Government or politics or something like that. Because I think one of the other unfortunately uniting factors of America is just a lack of political involvement or advocacy. So I think that might be more productive, you know, if you're thinking about it in terms of that. But I agree, even like world history or a more general history credit might be more beneficial for just people, you know, and like global citizens instead of just American citizens. Because I think that's true. Like Europeans, it's so easy for you guys to travel, and I'm so jealous of that. That's definitely a blanket, you know, a blanket
That is true.
statement.
The borders are very open. Just drive across.
I mean, it's 6 hours from the top to the bottom of my
drive
country by car.
Wow.
Which is the long way.
Yeah, actually, I was in like 4 years ago or something, maybe 5. My family did a road trip across European countries, so that was really cool. And we could never we went to so many different countries. We can never do that in US. I mean, we could do statewide, but like countries, we have to drive like 14 hours to get to Canada. I'm just like,
I mean, imagine driving from Canada to Mexico would already be
that's a long
huge
drive.
road trip.
It's 20 plus hours right there.
Another thing that you said, Tomas, is that for Americans, and again, not to generalize because there are those specific cases, but in general, a lot of the life, like you said, resumes mainly within the country. So the most kind of thing is that, like you said, if you're going to take a holiday, you hop across to the other side of the country. But in Europe, obviously, that's very different because, you know, driving down a few hours, like we said, you get to a completely different country and completely different way of, maybe not different way of life, but certain differences, cultural differences and all that you get to experience, and it's again a lot more accessible for those people. What do you think, from your point of view, and I think you've also kind of mentioned this, and how people have the perception of how it shapes their perception, how they view or make their worldview based on that. How do you think that differs, I guess, having that advantage and being on that end of it, of being in that particular situation where you are accessible to this opportunity, or maybe not opportunity, but that particular way of life, right? Be having that open to you versus those in America that, like you've said, we've presented that particular example.
Right, that's a great question. I think, for one, it makes a huge difference in how Americans and Europeans view people from other countries, in the way that, well, in Europe, as you guys were mentioning, it's a lot easier to travel, not just because it's close to each other, but because things like the European Union enable us to pretty much have open borders all around. And it's just so easy to be immersed by completely different cultures. And while U.S. states also vary wildly in terms of political opinions and cultures, really, you end up still, you're all Americans. You're all speaking the same language. You all have that one common thing, which is your nationality and your
right.
And so, so I
and
feel
language,
like that,
actually, going back.
I
Well,
feel
we
like
don't
that
have
changed.
we don't have we don't
Or
have
in Spanish,
national
sorry.
language. Yeah.
Really, I
Really?
didn't know that.
Oh yeah.
But as I was saying,
It's just
I think
predominantly English.
that changes the way that or people's worldviews, and the way that Americans might look more for themselves, look out for themselves, as a country in general, be more nationalistic in that sense, which isn't necessarily a bad thing,
No.
of course, but I think that Europeans, of course, I'm not saying that. I mean, we're all stuck up. I'm not going to lie about that. Europeans are very stuck up, but
Yeah.
but at the same time, I think this really connects with what I was saying about talking about social benefits and talking about helping everyone out rather than just helping ourselves first.
Right.
Even though, of course, European countries will still always look out for themselves first and then for others.
Yeah, right.
But things like the European Union wouldn't really be possible if countries were looking out for themselves and only for themselves.
Right.
And I think that really changes a lot culturally, and in every way, really, in everyone's worldviews, how you're raised.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious what you guys think, right? Because you guys are very immersed in America, and I mean, Pooja might be able to actually say something about that, because she does travel very, very often too. I'm curious as to what she would say too.
Yeah, I know that when you're just in the U.S., at least before I started going to a lot of international competitions, when I was just in the U.S., you kind of are limited in your view, and you start to see yourself in one way and just tied to American culture. And I think that's how everybody feels. Like you kind of grow up in the same environment, and so you're never really exposed to outside ideas and outside cultures, and kind of, as Chloe said, outside ways of life, because everybody around the world lives in different ways. And so I think when I went to European countries, just all of them in general, I kind of got a new perspective about how people interacted with each other, which was, as we've already discussed, very different from how people interact in the US, where they don't seem as outward. Like, they're more into themselves, as Chloe already said.
My first
Tomas.
impression coming into America was that you guys are so friendly.
Yes.
I was so
Yeah.
surprised when I walked
No,
into
yeah.
the
When I went to Europe-
supermarket and pharmacy. The guy was like,
Yeah. When I went to Europe, in some
Absolutely.
countries, it felt kind of cold. Like, I didn't feel as welcome as I did in the US whenever I go into the US. But maybe that's also just because I grew up in the US. Like, coming from a different country might naturally give you that impression. But it didn't feel as welcoming.
That's interesting, especially compared with what Tomas was saying about, like, which I do agree with. I think Americans are very, like, to the extent that any country is, but America is very, focused on ourselves, right? Because I think a lot of it might have to do with our size, where we don't really see the need to rely on other countries. We think that we can. Don't agree with, But we think that we can make it on our own, right? And that's why we can prioritize ourselves in that way without really looking at other countries. But it's interesting to kind of pair that with the individual, I guess, stereotype that we all agree on of Americans being friendly, generally.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the juxtaposition of being, as a nation, very self-interested and very not isolated at all, but very sure that we can get by on our own, between, you know, the individual characteristic of being very friendly both in our country or outside of it. So it's interesting. It could be that we're defined by being, like, you know, very community oriented and like helping our neighbors. It's just that we have a very limited view as to who our neighbors are and what community we have an obligation to. Because I think that for the most part, Americans don't really recognize our place in the global community as something that we really have an obligation to, or something important. And I think, right?
And
yeah, go for it.
No, it makes sense. I mean, it's not. Well, going back to what you were saying about the U.S. believing that it can get by on its own, it comes from somewhere.
Right.
And you guys are justified as a country in thinking that, because in a lot of ways the U.S. was and is a great, like, the best country in so many metrics. And I feel like this was especially undeniable in the maybe 100 to 150 years ago, even though in the past 50 years, that the U.S. was the most powerful country, the greatest country in the world. But I think that's where European countries, as they started progressing past that, I think that's where a lot of the hate for going from Europe towards the Americans comes from, which is that Europeans look at Americans and see a superiority complex, see Americans thinking that they're the best in the world.
Well, we say it.
Self-centered.
They don't need help. Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of the European, I mean, I don't want to say hate. I don't think it's necessarily hate. It's a kind of condescension in a way. I'm not even sure if that's a word.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's actually right. Interesting. Have you seen Family Guy?
No.
That TV show?
Of course.
Yeah. So most people
I
know.
haven't.
No, you guys haven't. That's
No.
Well, okay. I guess, Tomas, if you have, I mean, do you see any of that? Like, I think me watching that, and I actually have a friend who like sends me a lot of these things that are quite, like, kind of, you said, it's made fun of in a lighthearted way. But and I guess that's that's what makes that TV show so popular. For those of you who don't know, it's a cartoon kind of show with for adults. Obviously, it's with very explicit content, so it's not a cartoon show for like 10-year-olds, or preferably not. But there's quite a few. It focuses. I mean, Tomas, if you've watched it, maybe you could talk a bit about the premise of it and kind of like the central, maybe not plot, but what it is about.
Well, yeah, there isn't a plot, so there's not really any way to go about it.
Oh
but
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it's just one of those funny Comedy Central style 20-minute per episode shows, where there's nothing that they're really following. It just follows an American family, and well, with a lot of surrealist events in the way that it's a cartoon, and so they can still do whatever they want with it. And it ends up making a lot of political commentaries through jokes. They're not that obvious, but of course there's caricatures of people and different things like that.
It's interesting that
shows
non-Americans are the ones that have watched the show. Me too.
He's like, wow, all the Americans here are just like, wait, what is this?
But it's shows like that, like Family Guy and like American Dad and those different, and The Simpsons. You guys all know The Simpsons.
Yeah.
Oh, so
no, I've not watched this.
But it's shows like that kind of gave me an idea of what the U.S. culture was like back before I knew anyone from the U.S. And I mean, in a lot of ways they're right, but of course in a lot of ways they're also wrong. But they make a lot of political commentaries and well, just societal commentaries through their jokes and through their different episodes. A little bit like South Park, although I think South Park is
even
more
less family friendly.
that.
It's interesting that you guys got the media that you guys got, as a maybe first introduction to American culture or something like that. Because I was thinking about maybe my media exposure to European culture, as you were talking, Tomas, and I cannot recall that ever happening. Like, I think my media, and I would say like generally global media too, is very Americanized. So I really I haven't seen
No, yeah, I
a large
agree.
representation.
And even music
very
in
Americanized.
general.
For sure, if I play the radio, if I open the television, doesn't matter where I am in the world, chances are I'm going to see something that's American or American made.
Yeah, it's like it's also like categorized like it's called pop in America, but like if you go to somewhere else, it's like British pop or K-pop or C-pop or whatever. It's always in America. That's like the central place for music, I think.
I think it makes sense if you can. Oh, sorry, Pooja, go ahead.
Okay, well, this is kind of a side note, but when I went to European countries for the first time, I was not accustomed to the fact that tipping was not something that people really do. Yeah.
That was a huge thing. Yeah, I made that huge mistake coming into America too.
In the US, it's a 20% tip. Like, that's kind of expected.
Right, yeah.
But when I went to Germany for the first time, my mom gave a 20% tip for a meal, and they were like, wait, why are you paying us 20% extra for the meal? We were like, no, it's for you. It's for you.
Oh my God, okay.
Here, if we go to a restaurant, usually a tip is like €1 or €2 extra. It's nothing special.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I've been to 20 countries. 17 of those were European. So yeah, I noticed that tipping is not as accustomed. But like, I've been to Japan, and we were trying to give a tip, and they were just like, no. They were like refusing.
Oh no,
it.
yeah.
And we're just
I can speak on behalf of the Asian community for that
we're
sense.
just like trying to we're just giving a tip because you think we did a great job, and they're like, no. And I think they were taking offense for us giving tips. I'm like, okay.
It wasn't. I don't think it was really offense, to elaborate on that. When here in Hong Kong, growing up here as well, when families come together and we have a shared meal, for example, and I think actually this is just a general thing. Maybe it's not even just on behalf of the Asian community. When you share a meal between like two families or two friends, it comes down to who's going to pay for the bill, right? For on our end, I guess you guys can elaborate too. It comes at, like, for us, it was like, oh no, like, I'll pay, don't worry, it'll be okay. And then the other side is like, no, I'll pay, kind of thing, right? So it's not really taking offense. It's just that I don't know actually about Sophie for that particular example, but for that, I think it connects to that particular example in terms of just maybe respect, not even respect, just that personal. Or I don't think that's even a good word of putting it. Not even personal. It's just kind of how it's supposedly works, right?
It's
right. Exactly, polite. Thank you.
Well,
that's what I'm looking for.
Cultural customs in a way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you're not expecting anything.
I noticed that a lot in Portugal, or even just in Europe in general. Like, for example, when you greet someone in the US, it doesn't matter who it is, you'll usually just give a handshake. In Europe, there's all the different countries have different ways to greet. Like in Portugal, if you're meeting a man, you give a handshake. If you're meeting a woman, you give 2 kisses on the cheek or 1 kiss on the cheek.
Yeah.
And things like that end up being really different. I also noticed it in, for example, how we address our elders. In English, there's only really one way to do it, which is you.
Right.
Whereas in Portuguese, we have a formal way, an informal way, and 20 different ways of conjugating them, which wouldn't exist in English. And that does change the dynamic a little, in that sometimes it's a little hard to know who you should address in the formal way, who you should address in the informal way. Even in some cases, it's considered rude to address them by a pronoun rather than their actual name. Like if I was addressing my grandma or talking about my grandma, if I addressed her as she, that would be considered not rude, but not polite.
Right.
And so I'd have to address her as Avon, which
Americans
is grandma.
are definitely very casual too in everything from the language. Definitely. I know Spanish does that too. In terms of like the formal you and tenses and everything. So we're definitely very casual, and I've experienced that too with just families that I've met who are European, you know, it's different. You know, I give big hugs to everyone I meet, and that doesn't fly for some families.
Right,
And I've
Yeah.
learned that slowly. But you have to like ease them into
I
it.
love giving
But,
hugs.
but it's
Yeah.
a learning curve.
yeah. There's a
Oh, okay.
stereotype actually that I mean I don't know whether this applies to the whole country, right? But there is like the addressing your parents by
Oh,
your
right.
first
I
name.
don't do that, but
I've seen that a lot, and that for us is very
I
outlandish.
That's a thing?
I could never do that.
Yeah,
It's always mom.
There are some
Oh, you
US
didn't?
kids
Yeah.
that refer to their parents by their first name and not as mom or dad.
Yeah.
Oh my god,
Yeah.
My friend started
how?
doing it young.
That just
I
blows
She
my
was like
mind.
11 years old and being like, "Hey, Leah, are we going out to dinner tonight or something?" Say it. The range for me to see.
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean,
but
it's
like,
not common, but
I've never.
yeah.
I can't imagine
Okay,
doing
yeah,
that.
I've
Glad
not
we're all on the
seen
same
that.
page.
Especially
Yeah,
since
it's
like
not
I have
common.
cultural roots in like in America, but also like as a Desi Pakistani, so I have two different views. And like for me, taking an American perspective, that would be a little bit weird. But like as a Pakistani perspective, I'm just like I would never call my mom by her first name. That would be so weird.
Right. Yeah. I think we have one more thing for you, Tomas, before we wrap up. We have a box kind of segment that we do on this
Love our
podcast
box.
now.
Oh.
That whenever we bring in a special guest. It's why we're called Blur Box.
Definitely
Living up to
why.
our name.
You have been part of the student government for OHS for a while, and I think you've also been involved with student government or in student leadership positions in your brick-and-mortar school. So you would kind of know the difference between the student community online and offline. Would you be able to think of some words associated with the student community online and say that's kind of inside the box? And then tell us some of the words that come to mind when you think of the student community offline that come, I guess we would say, outside the box.
Specifically applying to my experience, meaning OHS versus my brick and mortar school.
I think in general, because we have a list of words here that have come in from our audience and from others who have kind of given us a list of words that they feel have associated with the student community online and then the student community offline. So let's see how many that you actually get correlated in sync with those.
Well, for the online one, I'm going to start off with that. I'd say that people are very nice, but sometimes it feels a little ceremonious. I don't think that's really an expression in English. That's what we would say in Portuguese, but it feels like you're being nice, but not really in a natural way. And that's what I end up noticing a lot. But at the same time, it's still really pleasant. I'm not going to lie. Like being around nice people who are always laughing, always smiling, and not really being fake. I wouldn't go that far at all. So yeah, that's going to be my first word. Nice.
I mean, I wouldn't agree. I'm sorry, I wouldn't agree. I wouldn't argue with that one because I think it's just that that screen, that actual screen that makes you put on this online face, right? It's not, you turn that screen off, you move away from it, you're a completely different person. Or hanging out with someone in person, you don't see all aspects, all range of not even just movement, but all of their behavior. Things like that, right? So I think you're spot on actually.
Yeah, and building off of that,
even though that's not one we have down here.
I would describe a physical school's environment as more extroverted, applying to the environment as a whole. Because these people see each other every single day, because they're used to being next to each other, and there's no kind of hidden awkwardness or hidden.
That's
ceremony.
one of the words I wanted to put on
I don't know how to describe it in English.
Extroverted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ceremonious?
No.
Oh yeah.
No. Lively is definitely one of them. Yeah. So I think you've got that one down.
So yeah, I think that's something that really contrasts how the online environment feels in that way when you're interacting with people. But I don't think any of them is necessarily better than the other. Just by themselves. I think once you take into account when you go to meetups, for example, after maybe 3-4 days in the meetup, things are going to seem completely normal. Things are going to seem like you've seen these people every day for the past year of your life.
Yeah.
Can't really come up with other words. I'm sorry to disappoint you like that. But I'm trying to think, and nothing much is coming up. I mean, in terms of student leadership, which you were pointing out, I think the biggest differences end up being in the fact that as student body president of an online school, there aren't really that many issues with the school that students want to fix. In a way, like all of the issues that students want to fix are fixable. So there's not really that kind of, if there's something wrong with the school, there's not as much of a united voice for change, which I could see, which I've seen multiple times happen in my brick-and-mortar school. When people do want a change to happen, they'll come together, they'll argue together in group chats and create a petition and email a teacher, and basically band together as a school. So I do see that a lot more in the physical environments than in the online environments.
Right.
But I think that it changes when you consider close friendships and small friend groups, which works really well in an online environment, and keeping contact with these people through social media. So the two words that I'm going to take out of that in the physical environment would be united as a whole. You can make that just united. And in an online environment, well, does anyone have any suggestions? I don't even know how to put that
Complicated.
into words, which is that
there's actually quite a few here. Then you can maybe say that whether you agree with them or not, and the rest of you as well. So here's a couple of them. So one of them is niche. Then we have weird, ambitious, isolating, global, inspiring, diverse, and then one word of effort. So I guess starting off with that first before we go into offline. I think for referring to effort, it's that effort that we talked about in the beginning, right? Of making that effort to convert time zones and try to,
some of those
to speak with your friends.
So
it
takes effort.
Niche was one of mine, I know. And I think that pairs along with the one about diverse.
I agree with
think people who do online school are here for a reason, because you have to, it's a very positive lifestyle in that you have to actively make the decision to pursue it. So, a lot of people at the school are really into sports, see Pooja, or Chloe, and they're really competitive in that way, or they're talented musicians, or they're just really good at, I don't know, like computer science or something like that. So you have something, and I also put ambitious, I think, or I wanted to, because I think that translates, where if you're niche and you have a passion about something, I think the people at this type of environment want to thrive in that, and want to be the best at that. So
everyone at the OHS has at least some idea of what they want to do in the future, and most people have a pretty set idea and pretty good idea and have already done things to pursue that dream. Like Chloe and Pooja, for example, with their athletic, future.
For me, like as a homeschooler, like it tends to like correlate in a way. Like as a homeschooler, a lot of my academics was done online. And for me, people always thought I was like basically isolated. I heard isolated as one of the words. I agree with that. And then like don't really get much social opportunities, or maybe like taking the easy way out as a homeschooler. But that's not true at all, because I chose homeschooling, and I continued with homeschooling because I wanted to take my education in my own hands, which is very similar to online schooling. I think people do that because they want to carve out their academic path in a certain way. But an interesting thing is like when I got into OHS and I said I do online schooling, and I'd say I go to Stanford online high school, people automatically don't think the same things because they hear the word Stanford in it. So I'm like, okay. One person almost thought I said I went to Stanford, and I was just like,
Just
Oh
no
my
kids.
god! If
That's,
only.
that's what my parents
Well,
told
even if
people,
you
and
say
that
online high
annoyed
school,
me
they like don't acknowledge
so
the
much.
online high school part. It's
They don't
just
hear it at Stanford.
yeah.
Stanford.
Yeah.
And then I get so
Yeah.
many questions like, does it help with your chances to
Guess
go to
we'll find out.
Stanford? I'm like,
Oh,
nah,
so
I
many.
don't think so.
So many people ask me if this means that once I finish high school, I just go to Stanford. I'm like, I
Yeah,
wish.
I
So
guess.
like, so the Stanford part of online high school has changed people's view on online schooling in general when I say that. But like when I was just homeschooling and doing my academics mostly through online settings, it was a different response.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think we're
Yeah,
running out
thank
of
you.
time here.
Yes,
But
thank
you
you.
so much, Tomas, for coming on and joining us today.
Thank you
Thank you.
so much.
That was super fun.
It was so nice meeting you. I have not met you, so it was really nice.
Yeah, it was really nice. I love this conversation. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. I think we could have gone on. We could have kept going, but
We probably
unfortunately,
could have.
Oh, yeah. I had
we're
like 5
a
other
bit.
things that I could have talked about.
We can do another
Yeah.
When it
episode.
comes to cultural differences.
Yes, part 2.
Intercultural dialogue number 2.
Yeah.
But yeah. Thank you guys for listening to Blurred Box with Chloe, Haven, Pooja, and Sophie. If you like our show and want to know more, check us out on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or please leave us a review on iTunes. Be sure to join us next week when we talk about the current digital divide between students and now the online environment that everyone's forced into with the current coronavirus, with our student body headmaster, Dr. Hoshi of Stanford University's online high school. So be sure to check us out next week and stay tuned for that. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. And thanks for listening, guys.
Thank you.